Hello everyone, my name is Sonia Alcaina. I'm a master's student of World Heritage Studies and I'm here to present on the topic of my master thesis, which is very much related to the subtopic of this conference, REimagine. I'm going to talk about the intersection of fine art contemporary photography and the field of cultural heritage. So for that, I'm going to show you, first of all, my table of content. So I will start with the context of an overview of it, and I will show you after that, see? Yes, here we are. I will show you after that the knowledge or the leading motivations that took me to start researching about this topic. I will also talk about my theoretical framework and the literature review that I use for it. I'll also show my research questions, the aims of this research, my intended methodology, and the case studies and potential micro case studies for it. After that, you will have a look at my self-hypothesis as well, and the same as my bibliography, a part of it because it's not everything. We will have time after that for a question and answer, session. So, when I started researching about this interrelation between photography and heritage, I realized that that photographs, in a way, they show us notions of what is worth to be observed. They create emotional bonds between us and the world. And in that way, they could be considered as an instrument where personal and local voices are overtaking an active gaze toward heritage. That way, they are constructing and controlling identities and processes of heritagization. Photography, in all of its expressions, since its birth at the beginning of the 19th century, has always been interrelated with the many ways cultural heritage is not only perceived, but also experienced. It can be said that it's an act of active participation in a certain social reality. There have been already photographers such as Ansel Easton Adams, who pioneered this linkage between photography and heritage at the beginning of the 20th century. He photographed Yosemite National Park and advocated for the dissemination of engaged attitudes towards the protection of nature and wildlife. And that way, he actually showed us how photography can actually exert a positive role in examining this linkage. Personally, there have also been many photographers who are portraying traditions and rituals and festivities who otherwise are hidden not only to scholars of heritage or anthropology or social sciences, but also to the public in general. I will examine some of them, and right now we can also have a look at my knowledge gaps. So, as I said, these days, contemporary photographers are actually taking a very active role in portraying certain traditions and rituals and festivities. They're doing so also in a very artistic manner. However, despite this impact that these visual records are exerting in the production, conception, and interpretation of heritage narratives, the field of, so to say, heritage photography, and is still under-theorized and potentially still to be tackled as well. There have been scholars who have been talking about the kind of iconophobia as well. Catherine Ramey and Emerson College stated, for example, that in its majority, photographs are only regarded as documents in the field of anthropology and social sciences. It's somehow that these experts and professionals in these fields are actually afraid of using images, and there has also been another points of view, like for example Gillian Rose, who debated about the need to critically analyze visual images because they're actually quite relevant for our understanding and interpretation of contemporary Western societies, and especially since the cultural turn. So that being said, there has been also more recent research about this kind of gaps that I'm talking about, this iconophobia. Waterton and Watson, for example, they actually said in a way that photography has accomplished recognition not only as an art form, but also as a part of a patrimonial lineage, and it has not yet been integrated in the field of critical heritage. There are therefore many questions to be answered, and one of them is, for example, when are the visual arts heritage and when are they not? And do these visual arts deemed as masterpieces matter, but other works not? And how is this actually assessed, and by whom is this to be decided? Professor Colin Sterling argued about the need for a more nuanced understanding of this impact. And he did it so by talking about the concept of heritage photography in his book, Heritage Photography in the Affective Past, published at the beginning of the 20th century. There is still a big gap, especially considering the intersection between heritage and photography from a critical and a creative perspective. So there are also a few other aspects needed to be dissected in a way about these gaps. Most of you are also familiar with the so-called Memory of the World Register from UNESCO. So after having a look at it, I realized that there have been very little examples of photography as an art in something as important as this register, which is a register of documents in the end. There's barely any examples of it. One of these few examples is the example of Edo Steichern's The Family of Man exhibition for the New York Museum of Modern Art in 1955. And this exhibition actually conceived, according to him, a mirror of the essential oneness of mankind. This is a pretty universalizing statement, I would say. The main aim of it was to create a feeling of belongingness to the same big family of these human beings. And it became a legend in the history of photography because it endorsed the memory of the Cold War era and also the hopes and the dreams of many people. But apart from that, it also entailed many problems. One of these is that, for example, this exhibition was lacking alternatives for the artistic and intellectual expression of the photographers. Those who wanted to go beyond the viewpoint of the exhibition had barely any options to reach the public. Also, what I would say is that this exhibition is a very good example of what UNESCO has been trying to show until now, and one of the critics to it, which is the critic to exceptionalism and universalizing perceptions of human diversity. So that being said, I found another example who was closer to a more artistic approach to cultural heritage within the Memory of the World Register of UNESCO, and that was the example of the records of Mexican photographer Manuel Alvarez Bravo. So for the first time, it was recognized a kind of an artistic nature, emotive value, and poetic nature in the end as well, among the criteria to be inscribed within this register. And that was already a big important step. Nevertheless, there's still work to be done. And this is what I'm going to try to do. So this is a little overview about my theoretical framework. As I stated at the very beginning, it's good to keep in mind that a photograph is nothing more and nothing less than a process of signification. And that is why it has been used in many disciplines for its evidential potential, but it's also a vehicle to transmit ideas of power, authority, and agency. So in this way, I started I started differentiating, in a way, between photography as a document and photography as art. On the one hand, documentary photography appears to be a technology to record evidence in which the photographer is regarded as a mere witness, and the photograph is just a document with informative values. This type of photography conveys, in a way, in its majority, a passive objectivity, or even a paternalistic gaze towards the object depicted. It has, in many occasions, even an exoticist and colonial aftertaste, and it has been used by experts in disciplines such as anthropology. On the other hand, art photography, which will be the topic of my thesis, appears as a mode of expression where the photographer represents his or her inner truth, implying an affective value. Different authors, such as Wilke Wenck and Rebecca Krebs, believe that art photography could act as a process to give individuals and their stories credentials and visibility. Photographs conceived within the art context offer not only a different kind of formal and thematic premises than those of documentary photography, but also this kind of photographs, they make use of exaggeration and art processes, and they translate the posing and the staging into acts of reflection. Other than that, I also made a distinction following the previous distinction as well between contemporary art photography and photographies who were being used as documents, as I said in the previous slide. In the field of critical heritage studies, there has been many turns, and recently they're overtaken the belief that embodiment and a less biased approach to cultural heritage is key to conceptual changes, to understand the role of cultural heritage in our contemporaneity. That's why contemporary art photography can be a very good tool to convey these ideas. So in this regard, I made a distinction as well between what Nietzsche called monumental history and the most recent approach to culture, where processes and the metacultural relationship between heritage and other social fields appears as necessary to understand the essence of culture. So monumental history, as Nietzsche named it, has blocked in a way the dialectical relationships between the past and the present, and its potentiality to project into the future. Those who benefited from the monumental history approach were those embedded in the expertise fields, and there were a few, and they remain within the realms of the privileged, thus stored in archives, museums, universities, or libraries. On the other hand, a more experiential approaches to history, such as oral stories, performative actions, or intangible manifestations, remain excluded from the archive. Contemporary photography appears to be one of those excluded by history and heritage expertise circles. The category of contemporary is in itself also a very contestatory space for the commodification of the past. For the contemporary, it's a very slippery and heterogeneous term. It is difficult to categorize and to define. So that being said, within the premises of this processual approach to cultural heritage, there have been also many critiques to the ethos of intangible cultural heritage and the conserved as safe and safeguard Ruskin methods. These methods, still in use by UNESCO, are contradicted for the ever-evolving nature of intangible manifestations. As it occurs with universalizing concepts used to designate cultural heritage, the meaning and its representation, such as, for example, authenticity, masterpiece, or integrity, the belief that every cultural manifestation has to be preserved is limiting and is outdated. That's why I talk about contemporary art photography as a cure for the monumental approach. Contemporary photography acts as a metaphoric vehicle to deconstruct the tyranny, so to say, of the representation of the past in the present. It integrates subjectivity and an imaginative aspect within critical heritage discourses, and it carries the potential of what is yet to come. So now I'll show you my research questions, and these are: do critical heritage and contemporary photography help to shed further light in the need of a more imaginative model of heritage? How contemporary art photographers are challenging the official discourses of heritage, bringing a more experiential and evocative model of heritage where people, practices, objects and places are interconnected. As a sub-question or as an open question, I also established the following one. How do contemporary art photographers can show an honest, solid image of heritage, and how they can do that through visual metaphors and a more artistic approach beyond the cliches and the sensationalism stereotypes that in most cases documentary photography has established within the field of heritage. So the aim of my research will be also to explore this concept of heritage photography and to explore it in contemporary fine art photography. Also, one of my aims is to unveil the potentiality of art photography for the future of critical heritage. And last but not least, I would like to show the active role of visual arts in contemporary art photography to imagine new and more democratic heritage narratives. My intended methodology, because this is still to be done, to be conducted, is a mixture of methods, including qualitative interviews with the photographers that I'll show you and others, qualitative content analysis, and of course, visual analysis of the photographic works. I will also employ secondary data analysis regarding online and offline resources and journal publications, etc. As I said at the beginning, I have here one main case study and 3 micro case studies. This has still to be discussed with my supervisors, but probably it will make more sense that I tackle the 3 of them. I will show you right now the ones that I'm talking about. The first of it, and my main case study, is the work Eyes as Big as Plates, which started in 2011 until today. It's an ongoing project by Finnish Rita Ikonen and Norwegian Caroline Hjorth. So, as I said, this series is ongoing, and it's representing a modern approach of Nordic folklore through the portrayal of seniors and often marginalized demographic segment of society. And they're interrelating with nature in a way to show this human belonging and the interconnection with it. So the project could be considered as tableau photography, like merely stage photography or art photography, and is conveying a clear artistic intention where the subjects pose in front of the camera. So I'm going to show you the examples before talking about my other micro case studies. So here is Eyes as Big as Plates. After that, I have also the work of the West African visual artist and digital strategist Noela Elo. And she explores notions such as identity, heritage, or climate change with her camera. She creates what she calls visual poetry, playing with light and color. Another of my micro case studies is the case of Ivorian Senegalese Aisha Fall and his photographic series. She's an autodidact iPhone photographer, and she works with topics that delve between her identity, her culture, and her traditions. And her work is fresh and creative, and I think that it depicts the daily magic of his community and the Black women she admires. Last but not least, I have another micro case study, and this is the study, this is the case of The Truth is in the Soil. This is a series of photographs taken in 2018 by the Greek photographer Anna Sakelaraki. This series depicts traditional communities of the last female mourners of the Mani Peninsula, and it highlights, using a very evocative and artistic approach, the performative and fictive aspects of the work of mourning. So, that being said, this is the soft hypothesis that I established, and it's that contemporary fine art photography, in its metaphorical capacity, acts as a unique force to mitigate this traditional gap established between heritage and other fields. And in that sense, a broader consideration of heritage as an active process that actually takes place in the present and is not only anchored in the past, shows up through the practice of contemporary photography. And this, in this process, involves naturally artistic, cultural, historical, and social testimonies that are very important to understand our current heritage. So here you have my bibliography, or a little part of it. And, well, I would like to say thank you, but before that, you also have the questions and recommendations. And as I said, thank you very much, Dankeschön, and now it's time for your questions.